The northern mountain range was the kind of place where silence felt alive, where the wind carried old stories and the pines stood like sentinels guarding ancient secrets. Elena had always been drawn to places like this, where the world felt untouched and wild, where she could disappear into her work and feel her heartbeat sync with nature. As a wildlife photographer, she lived for moments no camera could truly capture: snowlight drifting in slow spirals, the crisp sting of cold air as winter reshaped the land, and the thrill of finding beauty in places others avoided. This trip was meant to be simple. The weather reports predicted a calm week, lightly overcast, perfect for photographing the rare frost halos that formed near the higher cliffs. Elena had spent 2 days trekking through the forest, stopping every so often to set up her equipment, sketch trail markers, and inhale the icy scent of pine. But on the third morning, the forest shifted. It wasn't something she could name, a feeling more than a sound, as if the trees themselves were watching her. As if the mountain had awakened. She followed a narrow trail lined with snow-softened rocks, her lenses clinking gently in her pack. Her boots left crisp footprints along the frost-hardened ground. She stopped occasionally to snap a shot, golden morning light catching on the edge of distant peaks, breath clouds rising like offerings to the sky. Then she heard it, a twig snapping sharply behind her. Elena froze, heartbeat kicking up. She slowly turned, expecting maybe a deer or at worst a bear. Instead, a man emerged from the trees. He was enormous, tall enough that the branches brushed against his shoulders. His coat looked handmade, animal hide stitched with rough precision. A black beard covered half his face, thick and wild, and his hair fell in untamed waves. But his eyes were what stopped her breath. They were intense, dark, stormy, and full of a panic that didn't match the calm forest around them. He didn't look dangerous. He looked scared. Not of her, but of something inside himself. "You're off the main trail," he said finally, voice deep and rough, as if unused to speaking. "You shouldn't be here." Elena swallowed, gripping her camera strap. "I didn't know anyone lived out here." "I don't, not really." He shifted his weight, boots crunching against the frost. "I stay away from people." He said it like a confession. Elena offered a careful smile. "I'm just here to photograph the frost halos near the ridge. I'll be out of your way soon." His jaw tightened. The muscles in his hands flexed, as if he had to force himself not to reach out or perhaps not to pull away. "You need to turn around," he muttered. "Go back down the mountain." "Why?" Elena asked, heart thumping. Not out of fear, out of curiosity. There was something fragile in the way he moved, something that told her he wasn't threatening her. He was warning her. He took a step closer, then seemed to regret it immediately, stepping back again quickly, breath sharp. "Because I lose control around people," he said quietly, each word landing like a stone dropped into still water. "Especially you." The confession stunned her. His eyes darted away as if ashamed, as if expecting her to laugh or run. Elena did neither. She watched him, trying to understand. His voice was steady, but threaded with something raw: fear, longing, restraint. As if he had spent years building walls around himself, only for them to shake the moment he saw her. She softened her tone. "I'm not here to bother anyone. I didn't even know you existed until now. That's how I need it to stay." His breathing quickened, fogging the cold air. "Please, turn around and go back while you still can." Before she could respond, a distant rumble echoed across the peaks, the first growl of an approaching storm. Elena glanced upward. Dark clouds gathered faster than should have been possible. The mountain man heard it too. His head snapped toward the sky, expression tightening into concern. When he faced her again, the panic in his eyes had doubled. "You need shelter," he said. "This storm is bad. Worse than you think." "But you just told me to turn around." Elena whispered. "I know what I said." He swallowed hard. "And I know what will happen if you come anywhere near my cabin." His voice trembled. "But I won't let you die out here." With that, he turned toward the deeper woods, motioning for her to follow, and despite everything, his warnings, his fear, his strange confession, Elena did. The storm arrived too fast, far too fast to be natural. One moment, the sky was only slightly darkened, the clouds creeping lazily across the peaks. The next, the temperature plummeted so abruptly that Elena felt her breath turn sharp in her lungs, like the air itself was freezing from the inside out. Snowflakes began to fall, first soft and sparse, then suddenly thick, relentless, blinding. Silas had already started walking, moving with long, determined strides that cut through the snow. Elena hurried to keep up, the wind pushing against her body with increasing force. Within minutes, her eyelashes were coated in frost, and her fingers tingled despite her insulated gloves. "Is it always like this?" she shouted above the rising howl of the wind. "No," Silas answered without looking back. His voice was low, but somehow still carried through the storm. "This came out of nowhere. It shouldn't be this strong this early in the season." Elena stumbled over an icy root, catching herself on a tree trunk. The cold bit into her cheeks like needles. She had studied weather patterns before coming. She wasn't reckless. But nothing had predicted this. Nothing had even hinted at it. Silas finally stopped and turned toward her. Snow clung to his hair, gathering in the thick fur of his coat. His dark eyes held a mixture of frustration and worry directed at her. "You won't make it back to the main trail," he said. "Not in this. So what do we do?" she asked, breath coming in uneven puffs. A muscle in his jaw twitched. He hesitated as if weighing two equally terrible choices. Then he exhaled slowly. "You come with me?" He didn't sound happy about it. More like he was accepting something he'd fought for a long time. Elena nodded, relief mixing with lingering confusion. He motioned her forward again, and they continued trudging through the storm. Snow slapped against her face and arms, and the wind grew so violent it bent young pines nearly sideways. The mountains had turned hostile, unrecognizable. She tried to speak again, but the cold swallowed her voice. Silas reached her side suddenly, grabbing her elbow and pulling her close. His hand was warm, startlingly warm through her coat sleeve. "Stay near me," he said firmly. "The path isn't straight. If you drift even a few steps, the snow will swallow you." She didn't argue. The storm was so thick she could barely see the outline of his shoulders right in front of her. Minutes dragged into what felt like hours. Elena's legs burned, her feet numb, her breath shallow. She had survived dangerous landscapes before, but nothing compared to this. This storm felt alive, as if the mountain wanted her gone. Just when she thought she couldn't go any farther, Silas stopped again. His cabin stood at the edge of a frozen clearing, its wooden frame half concealed by blowing snow. Smoke rose faintly from the chimney, already being shredded apart by the wind. The place looked strong, anchored into the ground with thick logs and reinforced beams, but it still shuddered beneath the storm's force. Silas didn't move toward the door right away. Instead, he turned to her with an expression she couldn't quite read: fear, conflict, something deeper. "This is a bad idea," he said quietly, though the wind nearly stole the words. "I told you before. I'm not good at being around people. I'm worse when they're close. And inside, enclosed, it gets harder to control." He looked away, shoulders tight. Snow swirled around him like a restless halo. Elena stepped closer, swallowing her confusion. "You're worried you'll hurt me." His eyes snapped back to hers, wide. "No, not like that. Never like that." He breathed heavily, chest rising and falling with visible effort. "I'm worried about losing control of myself. My reactions. My emotions. I feel too much. More than anyone should. The honesty in his voice cut through the cold more sharply than the wind, but they had no choice. The storm roared louder, turning the clearing into a white blur. Helena's skin burned with cold. Her hands shook. "Silas," she said softly but firmly, "if we stay out here, we'll freeze." For a long, aching moment, he didn't move. Then, with a pained exhale as if surrendering to something inevitable, he reached out, took her arm again, and guided her toward the door. "Fine," he murmured. "But once you're inside—" He paused, gripping the doorknob. "Whatever happens, you don't go near me. Not unless I say so." His voice trembled on the last word. He pushed the door open, and warm light spilled out into the raging storm. Elena stepped inside. Silas followed. Closing the door behind them, and the mountain seemed to exhale, almost as if it knew a line had just been crossed that neither of them could go back from. The cabin greeted Elena with a wave of warmth so sudden it made her gasp. Her frozen skin prickled painfully as heat seeped through her clothes. The interior was dim, lit by several lanterns that cast soft golden halos against the wooden walls. The place smelled of cedar, smoke, and something faintly wild like the air after lightning strikes. Silas stomped the snow off his boots, but he didn't come farther inside. He stood near the door, rigid as a granite statue, shaking melted snow from his coat. His breathing was uneven, too loud, too heavy. Elena wasn't sure if it was from the climb or from something else entirely. "Sit," he said quietly, gesturing to a wooden bench near the fireplace. "You need to warm up." She obeyed, pulling off her gloves and holding her hands near the flames. The fire crackled softly, melting the stiffness in her fingers. But even as the warmth reached her bones, she felt the weight of Silas's presence behind her. Not threatening, just charged. The cabin felt like a reflection of him. Strong, built for survival, but filled with quiet, unexpected intricacies. Hand-carved tools hung on the walls. Wooden sculptures, wolves, birds, mountain peaks sat on shelves, each finely detailed with unbelievable precision. A massive fur blanket was draped over a rocking chair beside. A small table stacked with worn journals. She turned to look at him. He hadn't moved from the door. "Aren't you going to warm up?" she asked gently. Silas exhaled through his nose as if steadying himself. "I don't get cold easily, but you look, I'm fine." The sharpness in his tone wasn't anger. It was fear disguised as restraint. Elena drew her hands closer to her chest, studying him in the shifting firelight. His face was partially hidden in shadow, but she could see the tension in every line of his body. The way his hands curled slightly at his sides. "What did you mean earlier?" she began cautiously. "When you said you lose control around people?" His jaw tightened. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he crossed the room slowly, as if every step took effort, and removed his coat. Underneath, he wore a thick wool shirt that stretched across his broad shoulders. He hung the coat on a hook, then kept a deliberate distance as he approached a small stove, opening it to check the embers. "It's not easy to explain," he said finally. "Try," Elena urged. Silas's hand stilled on the stove handle. The rigid set of his shoulders softened, if only slightly. "When I was younger, I felt things. Too strongly. Anger, fear, attachment. It overwhelmed me. I would shut down or lash out without meaning to. People thought I was unpredictable, dangerous." He paused, smoke from the stove drifting past him like ghostly threads. "So I left," he continued. "I isolated myself. Learned to control everything. My space, my thoughts, my emotions. Being alone is the only way I stay stable." Elena listened, heart tightening. There was no madness in his voice, only pain and truth. "And me?" she asked quietly. Why do I make it worse? Silas looked at her, then really looked. His eyes were darker than she remembered, reflecting the firelight like molten ember. Because I don't understand why I react this way around you. The moment I saw you on the trail, something inside me stirred. Something I've buried for years. It's too strong. Too much. I don't trust myself around it. Elena swallowed. The room suddenly felt smaller, warmer, thick with unspoken tension. Silas, she said softly, you haven't hurt me. That's the problem, he whispered, voice rough. I don't want to. But when my emotions rise, they take over. And being trapped in here, with the storm outside, with you so close. His words dissolved into silence, heavy and trembling. Helena stood slowly from the bench, her knees still weak from the cold. She stepped closer, but not too close, allowing only the firelight to bridge the distance between them. You don't have to be afraid of feeling something, she murmured. Not with me. Something flickered in Silas's eyes. A spark of hope. A flash of fear. A war he'd been fighting alone for too long. But before he could respond, a sudden gust of wind slammed against the cabin walls, making the lanterns tremble. Silas flinched, his breath hitching. He staggered slightly, one hand bracing against the table. His chest rose sharply, his eyes squeezing shut as if holding back something powerful pressing against him. Elena, he said through clenched teeth, stay there. Don't. His voice broke, not from pain. From emotion too strong to contain. Elena froze, her own heart pounding with a mixture of concern and something deeper connection. Recognition, a pull she couldn't explain. Silas's breathing grew ragged, his hands trembling. Not with rage. With the overwhelming surge of emotion he'd buried for years, now awakened, uncontrolled. Because of her presence, he wasn't transforming into something monstrous. He was transforming into someone who cared, and it terrified him more than any storm outside. Asterisk. The storm raged for another night and a full day, turning the world outside into an endless, roaring white void. Snow hammered the windows so forcefully that Elena began to wonder if the mountain was trying to swallow the cabin whole. Inside, however, a different kind of storm gathered, quiet, tense, and centered almost entirely around Silas. He moved through the cabin like a man navigating a battlefield within himself. Every time their eyes met, something electric passed between them, something he quickly tried to smother. He cooked in silence, repaired a lantern that didn't need repairing, chopped extra firewood even though the pile was already stacked high. It was clear. He was trying to burn off whatever emotion had been clawing at him since the night before. Elena watched him from the rocking chair, wrapped in one of his heavy blankets. She could pretend she wasn't studying him, but the truth was impossible to ignore. Everything about him drew her in. The rugged lines of his face, the gentleness of his hands despite their size, the way he tried so desperately to create distance when every instinct in his body seemed to pull the opposite direction. Late in the evening, as the wind screamed against the roof, Helena finally broke the silence. You're avoiding me. Silas froze mid-step. He had been carrying another piece of firewood toward the stove, even though the cabin was already warm enough. He didn't turn immediately. When he did, his expression was tight, guarded. I'm keeping us both safe. Safe from what? She pressed gently. His eyes flickered, not with anger, but with conflict. From me. Elena set the blanket aside and stood. She didn't move toward him yet, sensing how easily he could retreat into himself if she pushed too fast. But she wouldn't let him hide forever. Silas, she said softly, you rescued me. You kept me warm. You made sure I ate, slept, survived. You haven't done anything to scare me. That's the problem, he muttered, dropping the wood onto the stack with more force than necessary. I'm not scared of hurting you physically. I'm scared of what happens inside my head when someone gets close." He ran a hand through his hair, pacing once before stopping at the far end of the room, gripping the edge of the table like it was the only thing keeping him anchored. "When I feel something strongly," he said, voice low, "it overwhelms me. I get intense. Too intense. It's why I left everyone behind. Why I don't go into town. Why I stay up here alone." His shoulders rose and fell with heavy breaths, each one shuddering slightly. "And you," he added, quieter still, "make it 10 times harder." Elena felt her heart clench. He wasn't pushing her away because he disliked her. He was fighting the force of how much he did feel. The ache behind his restraint was almost palpable. "What exactly do you feel?" she asked. His eyes snapped to hers. A flicker of raw vulnerability broke through his defenses. He opened his mouth, closed it, swallowed hard. The storm outside seemed to pause, the wind holding its breath. "I feel," he began, voice trembling, everything. He stepped closer without realizing it, one step, then another, until he stopped himself a few feet from her. His hands curled into fists, as if holding himself back was physically painful. "When you look at me," he whispered, "I feel like something in me is waking up. Something I've spent years forcing down. And I don't know how to control it. I'm terrified it'll spill out and I won't be able to pull it back." Elena's breath hitched. She took a slow, deliberate step toward him. "Silas," she said, "emotion isn't something to fear. Not with someone who understands." He shook his head. "You don't understand. I've been alone for so long that the first sign of connection hits me like a wave. It's overwhelming, consuming. I get attached too fast. Feel too deeply. It's not normal." "It's human," she corrected softly. He closed his eyes, as if those 2 simple words were too much. Another gust hammered the cabin, rattling the window panes. Silas's eyes opened again, glassy, conflicted, and unbearably sincere. "I don't want to scare you away," he breathed. "You haven't," she replied. He exhaled shakily, his voice cracking as he whispered, "Then you don't see what's happening to me." Elena finally bridged the gap, stepping close enough that her presence warmed the air between them. She didn't touch him. She knew he wasn't ready. But she stood near enough that he could feel her steadiness, her compassion. "You're not losing control," she said softly. "You're opening up." Silas stared at her as if she'd spoken a truth he'd never dared to imagine. His chest rose sharply, and for a moment he looked like he might break, not from weakness, but from the strength it took to hold everything inside. "Elena," he whispered. It was barely a word, more like a surrender. The emotional storm inside him had reached its breaking point, and he wasn't sure if stepping back from the edge was even possible anymore. The storm finally calmed on the 3rd morning. Not completely, just enough for the world to exhale. The wind eased into a tired breath, and the snow fell in soft flutters instead of furious waves. Light filtered through the frosted windows in muted beams, painting the cabin in shades of silver and gold. Inside, however, the intensity between Silas and Elena remained. It wasn't loud or chaotic. It was quiet, charged, pulsing beneath every glance, every breath, every step they took near each other. Silas had barely slept. Elena knew it by the faint shadows under his eyes and the restless way he moved around the cabin, as if the energy inside him had no place to settle. When she woke, she found him outside, clearing snow from the roof with long, powerful strokes of a wooden shovel. Frost clung to his hair, and his breath steamed in the cold air. He looked like he belonged to the mountain itself, carved from it, shaped by it. But his movements weren't steady this time. They were overflowing, too sharp, too fast, betraying the storm still raging inside him. Elena stepped out, pulling her coat tightly around herself. "Silas," she called gently. He froze mid-motion. His shoulders stiffened, and for a moment she thought he wouldn't turn. But slowly, hesitantly, he did. Snowflakes settled on his beard and eyelashes, giving him an almost softened wildness. "You shouldn't be out here," he said. His voice was rough, strained. "It's still freezing." She took a few steps toward him. "Neither should you." "I needed air, and did it help?" Silas let out a humorless breath. "No." Elena reached the edge of the porch, her boots sinking slightly into the snow. "Talk to me," she urged. He looked away instantly. "You don't want what's inside my head." "Yes," she said softly. "I do." The wind stirred between them, carrying the sharp scent of pine. Silas exhaled slowly, like a man preparing to lift something too heavy, too painful to hold alone. "It's not simple," he said. "Ever since you walked into those trees, everything in me has been fighting itself, harder than it ever has. I feel things I don't know how to contain. I feel too much." Elena didn't speak. She let the quiet open for him. He dropped the shovel into the snow, running a rugged hand through his hair. "I want you close," he admitted, voice trembling. "More than I should. More than I can control. And it scares the hell out of me." Her heartbeat stuttered. Silas stepped toward her without realizing it, just a small shift, but enough to shorten the distance between them. His eyes held a raw vulnerability, unguarded at last. "When I look at you," he continued, "I feel things I've locked away for years. Things I swore I would never let myself feel again." Elena swallowed, breath shallow in the icy air. She took a small step closer. "Silas, what are you afraid will happen?" He laughed under his breath-broken quiet. "That once I start feeling, I won't be able to stop." "And is that so terrible?" She whispered. His breath hitched. "It is for me." He turned away, gripping the porch railing with white-knuckled hands as if trying to ground himself. His voice dropped low, almost a confession whispered to the winter air. "I get attached too fast," he said. "Too fiercely. But I'm not someone who can offer normal things. I don't know how to be gentle with my emotions. I don't know how to take it slow. When I care with every part of me. And I don't know how to unfeel that." Elena stepped down from the porch, her boots crunching softly as she approached him. "Silas," she murmured, "that isn't something to be ashamed of." He looked at her sharply, his eyes shining with something haunted. "It scares people. It doesn't scare me." The world seemed to still. Even the snowflakes hovered as if waiting. Silas stared at her, chest rising and falling with trembling breaths. His guard was breaking, not violently, but like ice cracking and slow. Undeniable lines. "You don't understand," he whispered. "I'm already attached." Elena's breath caught. "I've been fighting it since the moment I saw you," he said, voice raw. "But I can't anymore." Silas took one step closer, only one, but it was enough to pull the air tight around them. "Elena," he said, barely audible, "I'm losing control not because you're here, but because I don't want you to leave." The confession hung between them, fragile and powerful. She looked up at him, this giant of a man who had fought storms, inside and out, and felt something shift, deep in her chest. "Then stop fighting it," she whispered. Silas's breath trembled. His hands hovered at his sides as if he wanted to reach for her but couldn't trust himself yet. "Elena," he murmured, voice breaking. And for the first time, he didn't turn away from what he felt. He stood in the falling snow, heart bared, walls lowered, and let the truth settle between them like the soft, relentless winter around the cabin. The storm had long passed by the time Rowan and Delara stepped outside the cabin, but its imprint lingered in the quiet world around them, every surface glistening, every breath of wind carrying the scent of renewal. The forest seemed to recognize the shift. as though nature itself understood the transformation unfolding between them. For the first time since she had met Rowan, Elara saw him standing without tension, without fear of himself, without the shadows that had kept him caged for so long. His posture was relaxed, his eyes steady, his breaths unburdened. The man who once warned her to stay away because he feared what he might become near her, now faced her with a peace he had never been able to claim on his own, yet. Despite the calm settling around them, there was a soft ache in Rowan's chest. He turned toward the mountains, the sunlight breaking through the clouds behind him, illuminating the rugged plains of his face. "You know," he murmured, voice low and earnest, "I kept people away my entire life. Not because I wanted to be alone, but because I thought I was too much, too dangerous, too unpredictable." Elara stepped closer, her boots crunching gently over damp ground. "Rowan," she whispered, "you were protecting yourself as much as anyone else." "Maybe," he said, "but meeting you, it forced everything inside me to collide. All the things I tried to bury." He paused, taking in a breath that trembled with relief rather than fear. "You made me feel, and I didn't know how to handle it." Elara nodded. "What happened in the cabin? That wasn't losing control." She placed her hand over his, warm and steady. "That was you finally letting yourself be seen." Rowan stared at their joined hands as though trying to understand how something so simple could feel so world-shifting. The storm inside him had always been a threat, but now it felt like a force that carried him forward rather than tearing him apart. Elara wasn't his weakness as he once believed. She had become the compass guiding him back to himself. As they walked through the clearing, the remnants of the storm reflecting like shards of light around them, Rowan found himself speaking truths he never imagined sharing. He told her about the years he spent isolating himself in the mountains, the fear of his own intensity, the way he used solitude as a shield. He spoke of the nights he lay awake, haunted not by violence or danger, but by longing for connection, for understanding, for something warm and real. Elara listened, absorbing each word not as a confession but as a gift. She knew that a man like Rowan didn't open easily. Every truth he revealed was a step toward a future he once believed he didn't deserve. When they reached the cliff edge overlooking the valley, Rowan stopped. Below them, mist curled between the trees, drifting gently through the hollows and rising into sunlight. The world felt vast yet intimate, like a place carved out just for this moment. "This," Rowan said softly, "is where I learned to survive." "But surviving isn't living." "Not really." His eyes moved from the horizon back to her. "You showed me what living could look like." Elara felt her throat tighten. "And you showed me strength isn't the absence of struggle. It's honesty, even when it terrifies you." He stepped closer, closing the distance between them until their breaths mingled. The warmth in his gaze was no longer restrained, no longer afraid of its own depth. "I lose control around you," Rowan murmured. The same warning he once spoke, but now it held a different meaning. Not fear, not danger, but surrender. "Not because I'm a threat, but because you make me feel everything." Elara's eyes softened. "Then don't fight it anymore." The wind brushed around them as if carrying their unspoken promises. Rowan reached out and cupped her face with a tenderness that felt both fragile and powerful. And when he kissed her slow, steady, deliberate, it felt like the final barrier inside him dissolving. No storms, no fear, just the truth of two souls choosing each other. When they finally pulled apart, Rowan rested his forehead against hers. "Stay," he whispered, "not because I need you to calm the storm, but because you've made this place feel like home for the first time." Elara smiled, her voice steady and certain. "I'm not going anywhere." And there, on the edge of the world he once hid from, Rowan found something he never expected to discover. Freedom, not from himself, but within himself.